Edit he left her bleeding and broken. Then Alpha King read her last message. His reply changed. What could her last message have revealed? And why did the Alpha King's reply change everything after he had already left her broken? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional Alpha King story filled with betrayal, destiny, and unforgettable choices. Thank you for spending your time with us and for continuing to support the channel. Your encouragement allows us to share more powerful stories with you. Before the story begins, tell us in the comments. Do you believe a single reply can ever repair the pain caused by someone who abandoned you when you needed them most? Now, settle in, open your heart, and let us begin tonight's story. When the second bell rings, do not drink from the silver cup. Clara Whitmore's warning was barely more than a breath, but it silenced the great hall. Blood spread beneath her palms, dark against the cold stone. Every breath scraped through her ribs like broken glass. Two royal guards held her on her knees before the throne, though she no longer had the strength to run. Above her stood Alpha King Ethan Blackwood. He wore black battle armor beneath a heavy wolf fur cloak. His broad shoulders were rigid, his handsome face carved into something colder than the winter beyond the castle walls. The amber eyes that had once softened whenever they found Clara now held only grief and fury. On the table beside him rested the evidence of her betrayal. A glass vial filled with blackroot poison, a letter carrying her signature, and the silver cup that had killed Noah Blackwood, Ethan's younger brother. You prepared his medicine, Ethan said. Clara tasted blood when she swallowed. Yes. The poison was found beneath your bed. I did not put it there. A restless murmur moved through the watching nobles. Men and women who had bowed to Clara only the day before now stared at her as if she were already dead. At Ethan's right hand stood Victor Crow, the royal chancellor. His silver raven ring caught the firelight as he rested one hand over his heart. My king, Victor said softly. Her guilt wounds us all, but the evidence cannot be ignored. Clara looked at him. A faint purple stain marked the side of his finger. Ink. The same rare purple ink used on the letter that carried her forged confession. Understanding struck her with such force that she almost stopped breathing. Victor saw the realization in her eyes. Then he smiled. It was small enough that no one else noticed. Ethan descended the steps of the throne. Each heavy footfall echoed through the hall. Look at me, Clara whispered. He stopped before her. You know me. I thought I did. The words hurt more than the guard's spear had. Clara reached toward him, but Ethan stepped back as though her touch carried poison. I, Ethan Blackwood, Alpha King of Blackridge, reject Clara Whitmore as my mate. The bond tore. Pain exploded through Clara's chest. She screamed as something invisible ripped through her heart and spine. Her body struck the stone, fingers clawing helplessly at the floor while the court watched. Ethan's face tightened, but he did not kneel. Strip her of the royal colors, he ordered. Leave her beyond the northern boundary. The guards dragged Clara toward the doors. Her legs trailed uselessly behind her, leaving a broken line of blood across the floor. A young stable boy stood near the pillars, pale and trembling. Owen Carter. As the guards pulled her past him, Clara pressed a folded scrap of parchment into his hand. Give it to the king, she breathed. Only after the bells. Owen closed his fingers around the blood-stained message. Behind them, Victor Crow watched. Outside, the first funeral bell began to ring. Edit. The northern gate opened with the groan of an old wound. Clara Whitmore was thrown into the snow before dawn. She landed on her side, pain tearing through her ribs as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. For several seconds, she could not move. The frozen ground pressed against her cheek, numbing the blood on her skin. Beyond the wall, the funeral bell continued to toll for Noah Blackwood. No bell rang for her. The guards had stripped away her blue royal cloak, her silver brooch, and every sign that she had once belonged beside the Alpha King. They had left her in a thin gray dress and worn leather boots, as if winter itself had been appointed her executioner. Clara pushed herself onto trembling hands. The severed mate bond had left an emptiness inside her chest, a hollow place that seemed to swallow every breath before it reached her lungs. Somewhere behind the stone walls, Ethan still lived. She could no longer feel his heartbeat, his anger, or the quiet warmth that had once found her through the bond in the middle of the night. He had cut her out of him. A sound escaped her throat, but she refused to let it become a sob. Crying would not stop Victor Crow. Clara staggered toward the tree line. Snow caught in her hair and melted against the heat of her wounds. Every step left a faint red mark behind her. She had almost reached the pines when hoofbeats sounded near the gate. Clara turned, expecting soldiers sent to finish the work. Instead, Mason Reed emerged from the shadows. The captain of the Royal Guard kept his hood low. His face was hard, but his eyes avoided the blood on her dress. "You should not be here," Clara whispered. "Neither should you." He held out a small leather pouch. Inside were dried meat, flint, a strip of clean linen, and a narrow knife. Clara stared at him. "You obeyed his order." "I obeyed enough of it to keep my head," Mason said. "Not enough to watch you die without a weapon." He glanced toward the walls. "The king is not listening to reason. Victor has the council in his hand. Then do not trust the council." Mason's jaw tightened. Was it Victor? Clara did not answer. A rider moved along the battlements above them. Mason stepped back. "Go east. There is an abandoned chapel beyond the frozen creek." He turned before she could thank him. Clara watched him disappear through the gate, then forced herself into the forest. By midday, the cold had settled into her bones. She reached the chapel near sunset. Half the roof had collapsed, and snow covered the broken altar. Clara sank behind a fallen pew and used the last of her strength to wrap her ribs. Then she pulled a piece of parchment from inside her sleeve. The paper shook beneath her fingers. She had already given Owen the warning, but it was not enough. Ethan needed to know why Noah had died. He needed to understand that the poison had never been meant for his brother. Clara dipped one finger into the blood at her side and began to write. "Ethan, if you are reading this, I may no longer have the strength to speak. Noah discovered that someone inside the throne room was moving Blackroot through the northern supply road. He believed the poison was meant for you." She paused as dizziness blurred the words. Outside, snow crunched beneath several pairs of boots. Clara folded the message and slid it beneath a loose stone near the altar. Men in dark cloaks surrounded the chapel. Silver masks covered their faces. One of them pushed open the broken door. "Search everything," he ordered. "The woman and the letter do not leave this force." The second bell rang as Victor Crow lifted the silver cup. Its deep toll rolled through the throne room, trembling in the glass windows and settling over the mourners like a warning no one understood. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood beside his brother's coffin. Noah lay beneath a black burial cloak, his hands folded over the sword he had carried since his 16th winter. White candles surrounded him, but their warmth could not soften the gray stillness of his face. Victor approached with 2 cups of dark red wine. "For the dead," he said. Ethan stared at the cup offered to him. Then Clara's broken voice returned. "When the second bell rings, do not drink from the silver cup." His fingers stopped inches from the metal. Victor's expression did not change. "My king." Around them, the court remained bowed. Every noble head was lowered in mourning. Every head except Victor's. Ethan looked at the silver raven ring on the chancellor's hand. Something cold moved beneath his skin. He struck the cup away. It hit the stone and shattered. Wine spread across the floor like fresh blood. Gasps broke through the hall. "My king." Victor stepped back. "What are you doing?" A hunting hound pulled free from its handler and lapped at the spilled wine before anyone could stop it. The animal staggered. Its body convulsed once, then collapsed beside Noah's coffin. Silence swallowed the room. Grace Miller rushed forward and dropped to her knees. She touched the hound's mouth, then smelled the wine on the floor. Her face drained of color. "Blackroot," she whispered. Ethan turned toward Victor. The chancellor looked horrified, but his heartbeat was steady. Ethan could hear it from 6 steps away. Too steady. Before Ethan could speak, shouting erupted near the doors. Owen Carter struggled between 2 guards, his face bruised and his lower lip bleeding. He was attempting to enter the funeral armed. One guard said, "I wasn't armed." Owen cried, "I have a message for the king." Victor's gaze snapped toward the boy. "Remove him," he ordered. Ethan's head turned slowly. "I gave no such command." The guards froze. Owen tore one hand free and pulled a folded scrap of parchment from inside his boot. Blood had dried across its surface. "Lady Clara gave me this," he said. Before they took her away, Ethan crossed the hall and seized the message. For one terrible moment, he could not open it. Her blood stained his fingers. The same blood he had watched spread across the floor while he stood above her and did nothing. He broke the fold. The writing was weak, uneven, and interrupted by dark red smears. Noah was not the true target. The poison was meant for you. When the second bell rings, look at the man who does not bow. Ethan read the words twice. Then he raised his eyes. Victor's place beside the throne was empty. The great doors stood open, letting winter air rush through the hall. Beneath Clara's warning was one final line. If I survive, do not search for me. Ethan crushed the parchment in his fist. The mate bond was gone, but somewhere deep inside the hollow space she had left behind, something moved. Not forgiveness, not hope, a heartbeat. Weak, distant, still alive. Open every gate, Ethan said. Let the whole kingdom hear my reply. The noble stared at him as if grief had finally shattered his mind. Clara's blood-stained message remained clenched in his fist. The paper had softened beneath his grip, but her final warning burned with terrible clarity. If I survive, do not search for me. Ethan turned toward the royal herald. Summon the Council of the Moon. Send riders to every pack before Victor reaches the northern road. My king, one lord began carefully. The chancellor has served the throne for 20 years. We cannot condemn him because of one letter. Ethan's wolf surged beneath his skin. The candles trembled as power filled the hall. I condemned Clara with less. No one answered. The truth of those words struck harder than any accusation. Ethan looked toward the bloodstains still marking the stones near his throne. Servants had tried to wash them away, but the dark lines remained between the cracks. He had stood there while she screamed. He had felt their bond tear through both of them, yet he had chosen pride over doubt. Even now, Clara's warning had saved his life while his judgment had nearly ended hers. Ethan climbed the steps to the throne but did not sit. Remove every order carrying Victor Crow's seal, he commanded. Freeze his accounts. Close the northern supply road. Any soldier who obeys him after this moment will be treated as an enemy of the crown. A murmur swept through the court. Grace rose from beside the poisoned hound. The blackroot in the wine was refined. It did not come from a healer's cabinet. It came from a military laboratory. Ethan's gaze hardened. Victor controlled the military stores. The last piece of doubt died. He drew the ceremonial blade from beside the throne and cut his palm. Blood ran across the royal mark carved into the stone. The ancient wolves answered. Power surged outward through the network, binding Blackridge to every pack under Ethan's rule. Alpha voices fell silent across distant halls. Warriors stopped at border fires. Families in mountain villages looked toward the north as the king's message entered their minds. Clara Whitmore stands accused no longer. The declaration shook the windows. Until the truth is judged openly, she is innocent under my protection. Victor Crow is stripped of all authority. Every command bearing his seal is void. Ethan paused, the next words cutting deeper than the blade in his hand. And I, Ethan Blackwood, place my own actions before the Council of the Moon. I denied Clara a lawful hearing. I broke our bond while grief ruled my judgment. If the law condemns me, I will accept its sentence. Shock moved through the connection. An alpha king did not surrender himself to judgment. A king did not confess weakness before every pack. But Ethan no longer cared what the crown demanded. He cared that somewhere beyond the walls, Clara might still be breathing. His voice lowered. If this message reaches you, Clara, you do not owe me forgiveness. You do not owe me your return. But the man who hurt you will not hide behind a crown again. The connection began to fade. Then pain stabbed through the hollow place in Ethan's chest. A heartbeat answered. Weak, frantic, far to the east. Ethan opened his eyes. At that same moment, a guard rushed into the hall carrying a silver mask stained with fresh blood. We found this near the frozen creek, he said, and tracks leading toward the abandoned chapel. Ethan descended from the throne. This time, he took no crown, only his sword and Clara's last message. The chapel door exploded inward beneath Ethan's shoulder. Cold wind tore through the ruined sanctuary, scattering ash and snow across the broken pews. 3 men in silver masks turned toward him. One held Clara by the hair. She was on her knees beside the altar, her gray dress dark with blood. A knife pressed against her throat, but her eyes were open. Alive. The weak pulse inside Ethan's chest struck once. Then his wolf took control. He crossed the room before the nearest assassin could raise his sword. Ethan caught the man by the wrist, broke the bone with one twist, and drove him into a stone pillar. The second attacker lunged from the shadows. Clara moved first. She swept one leg behind the man holding her and pulled him off balance. The knife sliced her neck, leaving a thin red line, but she tore free as Ethan buried his blade beneath the second assassin's ribs. The third man shifted. Bones cracked beneath his skin. Silver cloth split across a back, thickening with dark fur. Clara reached beneath the fallen pew and pulled out the narrow knife Mason had given her. The wolf charged Ethan. Clara threw. The blade struck the creature's eye. It howled, stumbling long enough for Ethan to seize its throat and slam it against the altar. Stone fractured beneath the impact. The wolf collapsed and did not rise again. Silence returned to the chapel. Ethan turned. Clara stood near the wall, one hand pressed against her ribs. The knife wound at her neck was shallow, but her skin had gone pale. He took one step toward her. She raised another blade. "Do not touch me." Ethan stopped. The words hurt because she had once reached for him without fear. "I came to take you home. I do not have a home in Blackridge." Her voice was quiet, but there was no weakness in it. Ethan lowered his sword. "You were right about Victor. I know. You saved my life." Clara laughed once, bitter and exhausted. "And you destroyed mine." He had no answer. Her gaze dropped to the bloodstained message tucked inside his armor. "You read it." "I sent my reply to every pack." Something shifted across her face, but it was not relief. "A royal declaration cannot put the bond back inside me." "I know. You keep saying that. Because there is nothing else I can say that would not sound like an excuse." Clara's hand trembled around the knife. Then her knees gave way. Ethan caught himself before reaching for her. Instead, he removed his cloak and placed it on the floor between them. Clara stared at it. "A choice," he said. "Nothing more." After a long moment, she lowered herself onto the fur. Ethan knelt several feet away and opened the healer's pouch Grace had given him. He set the bandages, needle, and salve where Clara could reach them. She studied him with wary eyes. "You followed the marks," she said. "The blood on the trees. They were not only a trail." Ethan looked back toward the forest. Clara pulled a folded scrap from the lining of her sleeve. On it were rough symbols showing bends in the creek, abandoned watchtowers, and storage tunnels beneath the northern road. "Victor has been moving Blackroot through these routes for months," she said. Noah found the first ledger. "Where is it?" "In the throne room." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Clara touched the silver clasp in her hair. "Noah hid it somewhere only I could open." A dying assassin coughed near the altar. Ethan crossed the room and seized him by the collar. "Where is Victor?" The masked man smiled through bloody teeth. "You are already too late." A horn sounded beyond the trees. Then another answered from the north. Clara forced herself upright. "That is not a hunting call." Ethan looked toward Blackridge. "No," he said. It was the signal used when an enemy army had crossed the border. Victor had begun the war. "Do not mistake my return for forgiveness." Clara's words followed Ethan through the frozen forest. They rode south beneath a sky heavy with snow, avoiding the main road where Victor's soldiers would be waiting. Ethan gave Clara the only horse. He walked beside her, one hand resting near his sword, listening for pursuit. By nightfall, the towers of Blackridge appeared beyond the trees. No royal banners flew above them. Black flags marked with a silver raven hung from the walls. Victor had taken the castle. Clara stared at the gates. "How many guards remain loyal to you?" "I do not know." "That means we cannot enter as king and accused traitor." Ethan looked up at her. "What do you suggest?" "We enter as servants." An abandoned drainage tunnel ran beneath the eastern wall. Clara had used it years earlier to carry medicine into the lower quarter during a winter fever. The passage smelled of wet stone and old sewage, but it brought them beneath the kitchens without being seen. Inside, Blackridge felt like a captured animal. Soldiers searched rooms. Servants whispered behind locked doors. Notices bearing Victor's seal covered the walls. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood has been corrupted by forbidden magic. Clara Whitmore is to be executed for treason. Clara tore one notice down. He turned your confession into proof that I control you. He knew the council would fear a king who surrendered authority. A scream echoed from below. They followed it to the old storage cells. Grace Miller was chained behind one door. Owen sat beside her, bruised but alive. 3 guards stood watch. Ethan reached for his sword. Clara caught his wrist. "You promised I would speak first." The contact lasted only a second, But Ethan froze. Clara stepped into the torchlight. One guard lifted his spear. The witch. The healer, Clara corrected. The woman whose medicine saved your daughter during the red fever. The man hesitated. She looked at the second guard. Your brother serves at the northern gate. Victor opened that gate to foreign soldiers tonight. That is a lie. Then ask why the raven banners went up before the enemy horns sounded. The third guard glanced toward the stairs. Fear moved through them. Ethan stepped forward, but he kept his sword sheathed. I will not command you, he said. Choose whom you serve. The first guard lowered his spear. Within moments, Grace and Owen were free. Grace examined Clara's wounds while Owen explained that Victor had called an emergency council. By dawn, Ethan would be declared unfit to rule. Clara would be executed before noon. We need Noah's ledger, Ethan said. Clara touched the silver clasp in her hair. And the antidote. Everyone looked at her. Grace's face tightened. Antidote to what? Clara turned toward Ethan. His skin had gone pale beneath the torchlight. Sweat shone along his brow despite the cold, and black veins had begun spreading beneath the wound in his palm. Ethan looked down. The ceremonial blade. Victor had poisoned it before Ethan used it to send the royal declaration. How long? Ethan asked. Grace examined the wound. Hours. Clara closed her eyes. The final ingredient was moonroot ash, kept in the locked cabinet inside Victor's private chamber. Ethan reached for her hand, then stopped before touching it. You do not have to save me again. Clara opened her eyes. No, she said. I do not. Heavy boots thundered above them. A royal herald's voice rang through the corridor. By order of the Council of the Moon, Ethan Blackwood and Clara Whitmore are under arrest. Clara drew Mason's knife. But I will not let Victor decide who dies. If you draw that sword, they will call you a tyrant before the blade touches the floor. Clara stood between Ethan and the soldiers filling the corridor. Steel reflected the torchlight. At least 20 guards blocked the stairs, their shields marked with Victor's silver raven. Behind them waited 3 members of the Council of the Moon, dressed in gray ceremonial robes. Ethan's hand rested on his sword. His wolf demanded blood. He could tear through the guards before the poison reached his heart. Loyal warriors still waited beyond the eastern wall. One royal command would bring them crashing through the gates. Blackridge would belong to him again by sunrise. But the stones would be covered in the blood of his own people. Clara looked at him without fear. You said your reply changed the law, she whispered. Prove it was more than words. Pain burned through Ethan's wounded palm. The black veins had reached his wrist. He slowly released the sword. The captain facing them blinked. Your Majesty? Ethan unfastened the weapon from his belt and placed it on the floor. I surrender myself to the Council of the Moon. Grace stared at him. They will kill you before the hearing. Then the kingdom will see what Victor's justice looks like. Clara's expression tightened. Ethan removed the iron crown clasp from his cloak and set it beside the sword. I also surrender the authority of the throne until the evidence is heard. A shocked murmur passed through the soldiers. An Alpha King did not step away from power. Power was supposed to be taken from him with claws, steel, and death. Yet Ethan raised his empty hands. I will not begin a civil war to protect myself from judgment. The guards approached carefully. One fastened silver restraints around Ethan's wrists. The metal burned his skin, but he did not resist. Clara stepped forward. I return voluntarily as a witness. No, Ethan said. She looked at him. You owe Blackridge nothing. I am not doing this for Blackridge. Her voice was low and steady. I am doing it for Grace. For Owen. For Noah. And for every person Victor will destroy if no one stops him. Not for Ethan. He forced himself to accept that. The prisoners were marched into the great hall before dawn. Victor sat on the throne. He wore Ethan's black cloak across his narrow shoulders, but it hung from him like stolen skin. The silver raven ring gleamed on his hand. My king, Victor said with false sorrow. You have finally returned. Ethan's knees weakened. The poison was moving faster. Clara saw it. Her gaze dropped to the black veins spreading beneath his collar. Victor saw them too. His smile deepened. The council will begin at sunrise, he announced. Clara Whitmore will confess. Ethan Blackwood will be declared unfit to rule. Order will return to this kingdom. Clara lifted her chin. And if I refuse? Victor descended from the throne. Then the poison in his blood will finish what grief began. Ethan lunged, but the restraints pulled him down. His body struck the same stone where Clara had once lain bleeding. Victor crouched beside her. "The antidote requires moonroot ash," he whispered. "There is only one vial left." Clara's fingers closed around the silver clasp hidden in her hair. "Where?" Victor smiled. "In my private cabinet." He rose and faced the court. At sunrise, she may choose. Her confession for his life. Ethan looked up at Clara through the pane. "Do not do it." She met his eyes. Once, he had chosen his crown over her truth. Now he was asking her to let him die rather than surrender hers. Clara knelt beside him, but did not touch his face. "I told you," she whispered. "Victor does not decide who dies." Then she looked toward the throne. Behind it, hidden beneath the carved wolves, waited the lock only Noah's ledger, and her silver clasp, could open. "I confess." Clara's voice carried through the great hall at sunrise. A murmur moved through the nobles. Victor Crow stood beside the throne, one hand resting on Ethan's stolen cloak. Before him, Ethan knelt in silver restraints, his breathing shallow as black veins climbed his throat. Victor smiled. "Speak clearly." Clara stepped into the center of the hall. "I confess that I knew Noah Blackwood was investigating the northern supply road." Ethan lifted his head. Victor's smile tightened. "I confess that I hid information from the king because Noah believed someone inside this room was watching every message we sent." The council shifted uneasily. "That is not the confession I demanded," Victor said. "No," Clara replied. "You demanded that I admit to poisoning Noah." She looked toward the nobles. "And in exchange, Victor promised me the antidote hidden in his private cabinet." Victor's eyes flashed. "You lie." "Then open the cabinet." Silence fell. Clara removed the silver clasp from her hair and held it between two fingers. Victor's gaze followed it. That was all she needed. She turned toward the throne. "The night Noah died, he told me he had hidden the ledger beneath the carved wolves. He said only this key could open it." Victor stepped forward. "Seize her." No guard moved. Mason Reed entered through the western doors with loyal soldiers behind him. "Let her speak," he said. Clara knelt beside the throne and pressed the clasp into a narrow opening beneath the armrest. Metal clicked. A hidden panel opened. Inside lay a leather ledger, 3 sealed letters, and a small vial filled with pale gray ash. Moonroot. Victor's face changed. Clara took the vial first and tossed it to Grace. "Save him." Grace rushed to Ethan and began mixing the antidote. Victor reached for the ledger. Clara slammed the panel shut on his hand. He roared, "You should have died in the forest." The words echoed through the hall. Clara released the panel slowly. "How did you know I was in the forest?" Victor froze. "You sent men after me," she continued. "Men wearing silver masks. That proves nothing." Clara opened Noah's ledger. "Then perhaps this will." She read the first entry aloud. "Blackroot shipment, Northern Road, authorized by Victor Crow." Another page. "Payment to 3 guards for placing poison beneath Clara Whitmore's bed." The nobles recoiled. Victor's wolf burst through his skin. Bones cracked. His body expanded, tearing through stolen royal cloth as gray fur covered him. He lunged across the dais. Clara did not run. She seized the heavy silver funeral bell beside the throne and struck it with both hands. The sound exploded through the hall. Victor's wolf screamed. The silver raven ring on his clawed hand began to smoke. Noah's final letter had named it as the device used to control the poison routes and to weaken any wolf who wore it. Clara drove Mason's knife through the ring. Silver shattered. Victor collapsed in human form at her feet. Across the hall, Ethan gasped as Grace forced the antidote between his lips. The black veins began to fade. Clara stood over Victor, blood on her hands, but no fear in her eyes. "This is the same floor where you made them watch me bleed," she said. Then she turned toward Ethan. He pushed himself upright, tore the crown clasp from Victor's cloak, and dropped it onto the stone. Before the council, the soldiers, and every noble who had once condemned her, the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee. "I believed a lie," Ethan said. "I broke our bond. I left you bleeding. No crown can make that less monstrous." Clara said nothing. Ethan bowed his head. "Name the price of my failure." The entire kingdom waited for her answer. "The price is that you never decide my life for me again." Clara's answer settled over the great hall. Ethan remained on one knee. No one moved. The nobles who had once watched her bleed now stood beneath her gaze, afraid even to whisper. Victor Crow lay chained at the foot of the throne, His broken silver ring scattered across the stones. Ethan lifted his head. You have my word. No, Clara's voice was calm. I had your word before. Pain crossed his face, but he did not look away. I need more than a promise spoken by a king who can change the law whenever grief or anger takes him. She turned toward the Council of the Moon. Victor will face an open trial. Every witness will be heard. Every record will be preserved. No alpha, not even the king, will be allowed to condemn a mate without an independent judgment. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably. Clara continued. The royal healer's chambers will no longer answer to the throne. They will answer to a court protected from political command. Ethan rose slowly, still weakened by the poison. It will be done. And the prisoners Victor took? Released. The families punished for questioning my guilt. Restored. The guards who obeyed unlawful orders? Judged by what they did, not by whom they served. Ethan accepted every condition without argument. Victor laughed from the floor. It was a ruined, bitter sound. You think rules will change what he is? He said. He believed me because a crown always believes itself before it believes a woman. Clara looked down at him. No, he believed you because you gave him permission to choose rage over truth. Then she faced Ethan again. And that choice belongs to him. Ethan's shoulders lowered beneath the weight of it. Victor had built the trap, but Ethan had stepped into it willingly. That truth would remain even after every stain of blood was scrubbed from the floor. 3 days later, Victor Crow was tried before representatives from all 7 packs. Noah's ledger exposed years of stolen grain, hidden poison, bribed soldiers, and planned assassinations. The masked men captured in the forest testified against him. The guards who had planted the vial in Clara's room confessed. Victor was stripped of rank and sentenced to the northern prison he had once used for political enemies. But the judgment that changed Blackridge was not his. Ethan stood before the council without his crown and admitted every order he had given against Clara. The council found that grief had not erased his responsibility. For 1 year, the king's power of judgment would be suspended. All criminal rulings would pass through the newly formed Moon Court. The council offered Clara leadership of it. She accepted, not as Ethan's mate, not as his queen, as Clara Whitmore. Weeks passed. Winter loosened its hold on Blackridge. Snow melted from the lower roofs, and the first green shoots appeared between the courtyard stones. Ethan never asked Clara to restore the bond. He attended every hearing she called. He opened royal records that no ruler before him had allowed anyone to examine. When she disagreed with him, he listened. When she left a room, he did not follow unless invited. He did not try to purchase forgiveness with gifts. He tried to become a man who could survive without demanding it. One evening, Clara found a letter outside her chamber. There was no royal seal, only her name. She opened it beside the window. Clara, I cannot change the night I left you bleeding. I cannot return what I tore from you. I once believed love meant being trusted without question. Now I understand it means becoming worthy of trust, even when forgiveness never comes. I will not ask you to return. I will only spend the rest of my life becoming someone who would never abandon you again. Ethan Clara read the letter twice. Then she carried it to the great hall. The blood had finally been cleaned from the floor, but she still knew the exact stone where she had fallen. Ethan stood alone beside the dark throne. When he saw her, hope appeared in his eyes and disappeared just as quickly. He had learned not to turn hope into expectation. Clara held out the letter. I have a reply. He waited. This is not forgiveness. I know. The bond may never return. I know. And if I stay, I stand beside you because I choose to. Never because fate, law, or a crown demands it. Ethan bowed his head. Then I will honor the choice every day. Clara looked at the man who had broken her, then at the king who had surrendered power rather than hide from what he had done. She could not forget. She would not pretend the wound had vanished. But healing was not the same as forgetting. Sometimes, it was choosing what happened after the scar. Clara stepped closer and placed her hand in his. One walk, she said. No crown. No guards. No promises about forever. Ethan's fingers closed gently around hers. One walk. Together, they crossed the hall where he had once left her bleeding and broken. This time, when Clara walked through the doors, the Alpha King did not lead her. He walked beside her. A bond does not return because it is commanded, Clara said. It returns when it no longer has a reason to be afraid. 6 months after Victor Crow's trial, spring reached Blackridge. The snow withdrew from the northern valley. Rivers broke free beneath the ice, and green covered the fields where soldiers had once marched. Inside the castle, the Moon Court heard its first case against an alpha accused of banishing his mate without trial. The great hall was crowded. Clara sat beneath no throne. Her chair stood on the same level as the accused, the witnesses, and the members of the council. She wore a dark blue gown, and the silver clasp Noah had left her, repaired but still marked by the night. It opened the hidden ledger. Ethan stood among the observers. He wore no crown. The accused alpha demanded protection from royal law. He argued that a ruler possessed absolute authority over his pack and mate. Clara listened until he finished. Then she placed Victor's broken raven ring on the table. "This is what absolute authority created in Blackridge," she said. "Power without judgment becomes fear. Fear becomes silence. And silence allows innocent people to bleed." The court found the alpha guilty. His mate was restored to her family, given land of her own, and granted the right to choose whether the bond would remain. No one appealed to Ethan. No one needed his permission. When the hall emptied, Clara remained beside the table, collecting the records. "You changed the kingdom," Ethan said from the doorway. "We changed the law. You changed me." Clara looked at him. Months ago, those words might have sounded like another burden placed upon her shoulders. Now Ethan spoke them without asking her to carry the weight of his redemption. He had kept every promise. He attended council sessions, but never interfered. He returned confiscated land. He allowed the families harmed by Victor to speak publicly. Each week, he visited Noah's grave and read aloud the names of those who had suffered because he had refused to question the evidence. He never asked Clara when she would forgive him. That was why she had begun to. Clara crossed the hall and stopped before him. Ethan's eyes lowered to her hand, but he did not reach for it. "The northern villages sent their winter reports," he said. "The grain stores are full. Then perhaps you have finally learned to listen to your stewards." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I had an unforgiving teacher." Clara almost smiled back. Then warmth moved beneath her ribs. It was so slight she mistook it for breath. A single golden thread stirred inside the place where the mate bond had once been torn apart. Ethan froze. He had felt it too. Hope flashed across his face, followed immediately by restraint. He stepped back. Clara's heart tightened. "You are leaving? I will not make your healing about what I want." The golden thread pulsed again. Not whole, not healed, alive. Clara reached for his hand. Ethan stared at their joined fingers. "This does not erase what happened," she said. "Nothing ever will. It does not make me yours. You belong only to yourself. And it does not promise forever." His thumb rested gently against her knuckles. "Then I will be grateful for today." Outside, the evening bells began to ring. Once, their sound had carried poison, betrayal, and Clara's final warning. Now they called the kingdom toward open gates and a spring celebration. Clara walked beside Ethan into the courtyard. The people did not bow to her because she was the Alpha King's mate. They bowed because she had become the woman who made even kings answer to the truth. At the castle steps, Ethan stopped. Before the court, the soldiers and the families gathered beneath the new banners. He lowered his head to her. Not as a king claiming his queen, as a man honoring her choice. Clara tightened her fingers around his. The bond glowed softly between them. This time, it had not returned because fate demanded it. It returned because she was no longer afraid to stay, and he was finally strong enough to let her leave. "Love is not proven by who kneels first," Clara said. "It is proven by who rises without taking the other person's freedom." 1 year after the night of the poisoned cup, Blackridge gathered beneath a clear autumn sky. Banners hung from the castle walls, not bearing Ethan's wolf or Clara's name, but the silver scales of the Moon Court. Representatives from every pack had come to witness the signing of the new covenant. No alpha would ever again possess the right to sever a mate bond as punishment. No accused person could be exiled without evidence, witnesses, and an independent hearing. No crown would stand above judgment. Clara waited at the center of the courtyard, dressed in deep blue wool embroidered with white thread. The faint scar beneath her collarbone remained visible. She no longer covered it. Ethan approached through the crowd. He wore ceremonial black, but the iron crown rested in his hands instead of on his head. The past year had changed him. The hard strength remained in his broad shoulders and scarred face, but the arrogance that had once made obedience seem natural had been replaced by something quieter. Restraint. He stopped before Clara. The golden thread between them stirred. Their bond had continued to heal, but neither had forced it toward completion. It strengthened through ordinary things, shared meals, honest disagreements, silent walks, and the freedom to leave a room without fear of punishment. A priest stepped forward. By ancient law, he announced, the restored bond may be sealed before the kingdom. The Alpha King may reclaim his chosen mate, and she may be crowned beside him. Clara felt the crowd lean toward them. 1 year earlier, those words would have sounded like justice. Now they sounded like possession wrapped in ceremony. Ethan turned to the priest. No, the priest faltered. Your Majesty, I will reclaim nothing. A hush spread across the courtyard. Ethan placed the crown on the stone table between them. Clara Whitmore was never an object stolen from me. She was never a title I lost or a reward I earned by regretting what I did. His amber eyes found hers. If she stands beside me, it will not be because a bond commands her. It will be because she chooses to remain. Clara's chest tightened. The golden thread brightened, warm but gentle. She looked at the crown, then at the people who once believed a woman's place could be decided by an alpha's voice. Clara lifted the new covenant. I will sign this as head of the Moon Court, she said. Not as a queen beneath a king. Ethan bowed his head. And I will sign it as a king bound by the same law as every other wolf. They placed their names side by side. The bells began to ring. For a moment, Clara remembered blood on stone, a silver cup, and a final message written with trembling fingers. The memory still hurt. Perhaps it always would. But the pain no longer owned the future. When the ceremony ended, Ethan offered her his hand. Clara looked at it before taking it. Where are we going? Wherever you choose. She smiled softly. The northern hill. There is no road. Then we walk. They left the crown behind and climbed beyond the castle walls. At the top of the hill, Blackridge stretched beneath them, villages, rivers, forests, and open gates. Ethan stood beside her without speaking. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. The bond pulsed once, whole at last. Not because the kingdom had witnessed it. Not because fate had demanded it. Because neither of them needed chains to keep the other close. Below, the bells continued ringing. This time, they carried no warning. Only freedom. A kingdom remembers the day a king wins a war, Clara said. But it changes on the day he chooses not to begin one. 3 years after the signing of the Moon Covenant, winter returned to Blackridge. Snow buried the northern roads and pressed heavily against the castle walls. Yet the kingdom no longer feared the cold as it once had. Grain filled the storehouses. Healers served every village. Disputes between packs were brought before the Moon Court instead of settled with claws and blood. Peace had become ordinary. That was why the army outside the southern gate frightened everyone. 500 wolves stood beyond the frozen river beneath crimson banners. At their center waited Alpha Marcus Vale, ruler of Red Hollow, and the last lord who refused to recognize the Moon Covenant. He had brought chains instead of tribute. Give us Clara Whitmore, his messenger declared before the council. Her court has weakened the ancient rights of every alpha. Surrender her, and Red Hollow will withdraw. Ethan rose from his chair. The room darkened beneath the force of his wolf. Clara felt the restored bond tighten between them. She could sense the violence gathering in him, the instinct to protect her by destroying anything that threatened her. Once, that instinct would have ruled him. Now Ethan looked at her first. What do you choose? Every counselor heard the question. Clara stood. I choose to meet him. No, Mason said immediately. Vale did not come to negotiate. Neither did Victor, Clara replied. Yet he still needed the appearance of law. Men like Marcus Vale do not fear strength. They understand it. What they fear is losing the obedience that makes them powerful. Ethan studied her face. You will not go alone. I did not ask to. They crossed the frozen river at noon. Ethan walked beside Clara without a crown, though his black armor carried the scars of 100 battles. Behind them came no army. Only Mason, Grace, 3 members of the Moon Court, and 12 witnesses from packs once ruled by fear. Marcus Vale waited beneath the crimson banners. He was broad, gray-haired, and wrapped in bear fur. Silver chains hung from his soldiers' hands. His gaze moved over Clara with open contempt. This is the woman who taught wolves to disobey their alphas? Clara stopped 10 steps away. No, I taught them that obedience without choice is only fear. Marcus laughed. You have hidden behind Ethan Blackwood's love. Clara glanced at Ethan. He remained silent. He had promised she would speak first. Marcus's smile faded. You poison the old laws, he said. Mates leave their alphas. Servants challenge their lords. Women demand hearings as though their voices weigh the same as ours. They do. A murmur passed through the Red Hollow soldiers. Marcus raised one hand. The chains rattled. Kneel, he ordered Clara, and I may let Blackridge keep its peace. Ethan's wolf surged so violently that ice cracked beneath his boots. Clara reached for his hand, not to restrain him, to remind him that she was not afraid. Then she faced Marcus. I knelt once before a king who believed power made him right. Ethan lowered his eyes. The memory moved between them, blood on stone, a broken bond, a message written as she prepared to die. Clara continued. That king learned to stand beside the truth instead of above it. Can you? Marcus drew his sword. No woman judges me. The 12 witnesses stepped forward. One was Marcus's former mate, banished after she questioned the disappearance of village grain. Another was a soldier whose son had been executed without trial. A healer carried records of prisoners who had died in Red Hollow's cells. The soldiers beneath the crimson banners began to look at one another. Clara raised the Moon Covenant. Your crimes will be heard openly. Your people may testify without punishment. Lay down your sword and face judgment. Marcus shifted. His body exploded into a massive red-brown wolf. He charged across the ice, jaws opening for Clara's throat. Ethan moved, but Clara was faster. She struck the frozen river with the silver staff of the Moon Court. The weakened ice collapsed beneath Marcus. He plunged into black water. His own soldiers could have pulled him out. None moved. Marcus clawed at the broken edge until Mason dragged him from the river and locked the abandoned chains around his wrists. The crimson banners lowered one by one. No battle followed. No field filled with bodies. That evening, the bells of Blackridge rang across the snow. Clara stood on the castle steps while the people of Red Hollow entered through the open gates as guests, witnesses, and free wolves. Ethan joined her. You saved the kingdom again, he said. Clara leaned against his shoulder. No. This time, the kingdom saved itself. Below them, former enemies shared fires while children ran between the banners of 7 united packs. Ethan took her hand. The bond glowed warm and steady between them. Once, his reply to her final message had changed everything. But the life they built afterward proved that change was not one grand declaration. It was a choice made again and again. To listen before judging. To protect without possessing. To love without chains. And when the final bell rang over Blackridge, no one knelt from fear. They stood together. The last message she ever meant to write became the first promise of the life they chose together. 5 years after the winter Red Hollow lowered its crimson banners, Clara stood beneath the bells of Blackridge with a child asleep against her shoulder. The little girl had Ethan's dark hair and Clara's gray-blue eyes. One small hand clutched the edge of her mother's cloak while snow drifted over the courtyard. Below them, the kingdom prepared for the festival of open gates. No guards searched the arriving families. No alpha demanded that visitors kneel. Wolves from every pack crossed the bridge carrying bread, winter flowers, court records, and stories of disputes settled without blood. The Moon Covenant had survived. More importantly, it had grown. Every territory now held independent hearings. Every mate could refuse a bond without exile. Every ruler answered to evidence rather than rage. Clara had once believed laws were carved into stone by powerful men. Now she knew stone could be reshaped. Ethan approached from the great hall. Time had added faint silver to his dark hair, but he remained tall, broad-shouldered, and powerful. He wore a simple black cloak instead of royal armor. Their son walked beside him, carrying a wooden sword far too large for his hands. Father says kings must train every morning, the boy announced. Clara raised an eyebrow. Did he also say kings must eat breakfast? The child looked betrayed. Ethan hid a smile. He may have forgotten that part. Their daughter woke at the sound of his voice and reached for him. Ethan did not take her immediately. He looked at Clara first. Even after all these years, he still asked without words. Clara placed the child in his arms. The small gesture warmed the bond between them. Once, that bond had been torn apart by power used without trust. Now it lived through thousands of choices, so ordinary no court would ever record them. A question before a touch. An apology without expectation. A door left open. A voice heard before judgment. The bells began to ring. Their son covered his ears and laughed. Clara looked toward the great hall. The stone where she had once lain bleeding remained visible near the throne. She had ordered that it never be replaced. Not as a monument to suffering. As a warning. Ethan followed her gaze. "Do you regret leaving it there?" he asked. "No, does it still hurt?" "Sometimes." He accepted the answer without trying to fix it. Clara rested her hand over his. "The scar reminds me that survival was not the ending." "What was?" She watched the gates open wider as people entered the courtyard together. "This." That evening, the family climbed the northern hill. No crown accompanied them. No guards followed. At the summit, Ethan placed a folded piece of parchment in Clara's hand. The paper was old, its edges softened by time. His reply? She had kept the bloodstained message. He had kept the words he sent after reading it. Clara unfolded the parchment beneath the fading light. "You owe me nothing. I will spend every day becoming worthy of the truth I refuse to hear." Below the sentence, Ethan had added one final line. "I am still trying." Clara looked at him. "Good," she said. "So am I." Their children ran through the grass while the bells of Blackridge echoed across the valley. Once, those bells had announced death, betrayal, and exile. Now they carried laughter home. Ethan took Clara's hand. He did not lead. She did not follow. And together, they walked toward the life no prophecy, crown, or mate bond had chosen for them. A life they had chosen for themselves.